The disturbing anti-Israel alleged terror attack highlights concerns about illegal immigrants like the suspect who overstay their visas. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says she is not stopping her investigation at just the suspect.
Mohammed's despicable actions will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But we're also investigating to what extent his family knew about this horrific attack, if they had any knowledge of it, or if they provided support to it. Justice will be served.
Now, if that family is cleared, they're going to face expedited removal from the United States. One Democratic congressman, however, didn't seem too worried about visa overstays like this.
Of course, we need answers. We need answers about the visa overstay, and a visa overstay has nothing to do with the border. You know, I believe in border security. We need border security, but in this incident, it doesn't look like that is what is at play here at all.
So he says has nothing to do with the border. Well, this case recalls other terror attacks that were carried out by illegal immigrants with visa issues, in some cases overstays. In 2015, 2 shooters killed 14 people in a mass shooting in San Bernardino, California. One of them came into the United States on a fiancé visa, known as a K visa. Then back in 2002, an Egyptian national who overstayed his visa opened fire at a ticket counter at LAX airport, killing 2 people. A recent New York Post column titled "Colorado Attack Proves America Needs Some Common Sense on Immigration. Stop Importing Terrorism." Want to bring in now Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor and former Speaker of the House. He also has a new book out called Trump's Triumph. It is out now. Mr. Speaker, good to see you. Thanks for coming in today. So we just laid out the laundry list of previous cases. 2 of the 9/11 attackers were also visa overstays. Is it time for us to wake up as a country when it comes to vetting with visas who we're giving them to?
No, yeah. I mean, we ought to, first of all, wake up to why did they get a visa? The fact is we're going to need much stricter rules, both for China, but also for people who hate America. And I think that there'll be fewer people getting visas in the future because we will be screening more tightly. And then second, we ought to have a very efficient system that we can track you. If you overstay your visa, within 10 or 20 days, you should be gone. We have people who've been here for years who overstayed their visa.
Yeah, and when it comes to these visa overstays and talks about deportations, there's one Democratic congresswoman in the state of Vermont who's getting a whole lot of blowback right now for some comments she made. We want to go ahead and pull that up right now. She essentially said that if immigrants are gone, they're not going to have certain people to do certain things for them. Take a listen.
If we don't have avenues for people to come here legally to work or to build a home here, I'm going to be really crude right now. We're not going to have anybody around to wipe our because we don't have enough people.
Yeah, if you didn't catch what she said they wouldn't have anyone to wipe their blanks. The state's Republican Party chairman called on her to apologize and said, quote, "At the heart of these remarks is an opinion so offensive and so profoundly out of touch that it reveals a fundamental lack of respect for those who come to this country abiding by the rules in pursuit of freedom, opportunity, and a better life." And we do want to point out that Fox did reach out to the Congresswoman about her comments. She pretty much deflected, telling us, quote, "I've relentlessly condemned the Trump administration's cruel practices, targeting and separating immigrant families, and I will continue to stand up for the rights of every person in this country." Your thoughts on the Congresswoman's comments there?
Well, other than that, she's nuts. I mean, first of all, it'd be nice if she cared as much about Americans who were victims of these kind of illegal immigrants. It'd be nice if she cared about the people who had been burned or people who have been raped or mugged or killed. Somehow, if you're an American, Democrats find it very hard to be sympathetic. But if you're an illegal immigrant, they really want to make sure that you're treated in a nice way. It's a very strange model. But look, it goes deeper than that. First of all, we have in the fight over Medicaid reforms, the new bill requires able-bodied adults to work. And her whole point, you know, if you pay millions of people to do nothing, which we do right now, then you say, well, gee, we have to bring in people from outside because nobody here will do anything. And by the way, we're paying millions of people not to do anything. So I think part of it is you reform your own welfare. The second, Calista and I did a program last year called Journey to America about people who come here legally. I am totally for legal immigration. That's no excuse to support and favor illegal immigration, which is totally unnecessary in terms of our economy.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of blend together when they say the word immigrants. They don't separate between illegal immigrants and legal immigrants. Turning back to that Boulder attack, about a month before it happened, the state of Colorado, its Democratic governor, he signed a new law which essentially gave illegal immigrants all sorts of additional protections. Those include making it easier for them to get free tuition, state ID documents. It limits sharing information on illegals with the feds. It also prevents delaying the release of detained illegal aliens to cooperate with ICE operations. Now, a conservative think tank analysis found just a huge spike in sanctuary jurisdictions since Trump's first term back in 2016. Take a look at the graph right here. It shows that number soaring from just about 300 back then to more than over 1,000 right now. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt yesterday with this warning to those sanctuary leaders.
The Department of Homeland Security will be issuing a new list of sanctuary cities, an accurate list of sanctuary cities. As for what we're doing to crack down, the president has signed various executive orders and has directed the Attorney General to prosecute state and local officials who are not complying with federal immigration authorities and, most importantly, federal immigration law.
So this Boulder attacker, visa overstay, Egyptian national, in the U.S. illegally, apparently living comfortably in the sanctuary state of Colorado. Any surprise?
And may well be on Medicaid and may well be on food stamps. Look, the fact is, any sanctuary city or any sanctuary state is violating federal law, and I think it should be cut off from all federal funding. We just had the same experience in Boston, where the Boston police were blocked by the city from helping the federal employees, the federal authorities pick up people who are clearly criminals.
Yep.
And so I would favor either a law or it can be done by executive order that says if you declare yourself a sanctuary city or state, you automatically lose all federal funds. Because we don't have to tolerate this kind of behavior, which undermines the rule of law, makes it more dangerous for Americans, and basically protects people who have broken the law to come here.
Yeah. And it feels like, you know, with the Trump administration, their mass deportation agenda, every day, every week, there's some sort of federal judge issuing an injunction. There's been all sorts of them. And that was kind of the idea behind a Senate hearing the other day. President Trump still battling that federal judiciary as individual judges have blocked dozens of his orders. In less than 5 months, Trump has been hit with 39 nationwide injunctions. That is far more than former President Biden had over 4 years and more than double what Presidents George W. Bush and Obama had in their combined 8-year terms. A Senate hearing yesterday on these injunctions ended up getting heated. Take a listen.
One unelected district judge can now issue a nationwide injunction that ties the hands of the President of the United States for all 330 million Americans. That's not law. That's judicial tyranny. Did the Biden DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the.
No, that is what I said. That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again.
The answer is no. All right, so let me ask
you. Of federal judges. I did not interrupt you, sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric.
You said, quote, Justice Kagan, will she be able to control the opinion's future distortion by her evil colleagues? Probably not, end quote. Who are you talking about?
Sir, I'm very skeptical. If there's a transcription, it was probably a transcription error. I don't refer to Supreme Court justices as evil in the classroom,
on
sir.
On your podcast, April 22nd, 2024, and you're an officer of the court, and you're here advising us to be respectful to federal judges, and you say they're evil members of the United States Supreme Court? Gag me with a spoon.
Gag me with a spoon, he says. Your thoughts on that exchange?
Well, look, he's always colorful. I testified recently to the House Judiciary Committee. I began by reading the names of 14 people who were the judges who were eliminated by Jefferson in the Judiciary Act of 1802. They didn't impeach them. They just wiped out their courts. These district judges are unconstitutional. What they're doing is a complete violation of the Constitution. And if the Supreme Court doesn't get them under control, the Congress and the president are going to have to abolish a number of judges and get their attention. There's also a bill which has passed the House with Darrell Issa and Senator Grassley has in the Senate which would eliminate nationwide injunctions. It would say a district judge can only issue an injunction in their district. But what's currently going on is clearly a judicial tyranny and basically an effort to take over the presidency by individual left-wing judges.
And there was another nationwide injunction that's grabbing all sorts of headlines, that one having to do with putting taxpayers back on the hook for prison inmates' gender treatments. Listen to this. A judge yesterday blocking the administration from withholding those taxpayer-funded treatments to more than 1,000 transgender inmates. Then presidential candidate Kamala Harris touted her role in leading for advocates for these treatments in California, making it a, quote, critical part of the 2024 campaign conversation. Take a listen.
I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need. I feel very strongly about this, and at its core, it's a civil rights issue, it's a justice issue, and it's an issue of humanity.
So she ended up getting hammered by Republicans for those comments. Also said she'd want it for transgender illegal aliens, wants taxpayers to fund that.
Look, I think the average American thinks all of this is insane. There's overwhelming opposition to using your money or my money or our relatives' money to pay for people who are criminals, by definition, in prison in order to make them feel better about themselves. And I think that this is where the Democratic Party's gotten it. It has a whole series of these 15, 20% issues where the whole rest of the country looks and says, that makes no sense. But they are so deeply committed, whether it's defending illegal immigrants who are criminals, whether it is defending men winning in women's sports, or whether it is you and I having to pay as taxpayers for transgender operations. The average American thinks all this stuff is nuts.
And real quick, 20 seconds. If you were the House Speaker right now, what's a step you would do to try to rein in some of these federal judges with these nationwide injunctions?
Well, the House has already passed the ISA bill. I hope the Senate will pass Grassley's bill. And at that point, the president should sign it. That eliminates it. In the absence of that, I hope the Appropriations Committee will seriously consider following Thomas Jefferson's example and simply zero out funding for a number of these judges.
All right, we'll see how it all plays out. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, thanks for coming in this morning.
Great to be with you.
Good to see you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.